today I'm coming at ya with 50 plus horror book recommendations. Hello and welcome to another bookish video from me, Johanna, me, my dog and books. Horror is one of my favourite genres. I read quite diversely, but it is one of my go-to. Horror and thriller, then contempt. Anyway, it's one of my faves. So grab yourself a cuppa, notepad and pen, and I'm going to fire through them. So I'm going to list them all in the description. And if you've got any questions about any of them, fire them into the comments and I'll come back to you. So these are in no particular order. They're all books that I've read, and they're a mix of like psychological horror, holy horror, body gore, feminist horror, probably a mix of haunted house ghost stories, all of that. I've got my notes, as always, because I can't remember 10 books off the top of my head, never mind 50 plus. First, well, it should be no surprise to anyone that's watched my videos before, because this author is one of my favourite horror authors, and it is Augustina Bazterrica, and the book is Tender as the Flesh. It is a book set in a world, a dystopian world, where due to a virus we can no longer eat meat, so we start factory farming human meat. So there's cannibalism in it. It's obviously a book in translation, but it is phenomenal, and I have picked up and read every single book that she has written since then. So we've got Tender as the Flesh, 19 Claws and a Blackbird, which is a short story collection. And then I'm currently reading The Unworthy right now, which comes out on the 13th of March. This one is more holy horror. Short story collection is a good mix of different types of horror. And I recommend, so far, The Unworthy. I'm not finished, but I've already pre-ordered the finished copy, so I'm here for it. Tender as a Flesh, if you love gore, societal commentary, and don't mind some cannibalism, check it out. Then, on a similar ilk, in that maybe there's a bit of body gore, it's The Haar by David Sodergren. I read this at least in the last 6 months, not that long ago. It's a book set in Scotland. It's set in the kind of far north of Scotland. We have a elderly protagonist who's in it, who is amazing. It's kind of like fantastical paranormal horror. Muriel, who is the protagonist, has lived in this fishing village in the North Scotland for years. There's developers coming in, they're demanding her land. She finds this thing on the shore of the fishing village, takes it home, and stuff ensues. I'm not going to go further than that, other than to say it's kind of like folk horror with gore. It's kind of weirdly romantic, it also deranged. I can't believe I've never read anything by this author, and so now I want to read more. Then, another favourite author of mine, a go-to, someone that got me into reading since the age of about 12, is Stephen King. Now, I am sprinkling a whole mix of Stephen King books in here, and some of my favourites. The first one, can't not mention it, is The Shining. I don't think this needs much of it, but it's a good winter read. You've got paranormal, supernatural horror here, set in the Overlook Hotel, which Jack Torrance, the main character, played by Jack Nicholson in the movie, becomes the kind of caretaker of the Overlook Hotel during the winter months with his wife and his son. And the Overlook Hotel takes on a life of its own. It's terrifying. There's so much more in the book than there is in the movie, so even if you've seen the movie, definitely read the book. Also, perfect horror for winter season. Then, since I'm on a roll, so clearly my notes say some more Stephen King's, so the next one is Salem's Lot, which is definitely a book. It felt like folky horror, but I would say it's vampire based. It's a chunk. It's bigger than in size than The Shining, and I only read this for the first time a couple of years ago. I don't know how this one's passed me by. Probably maybe came out during the years where I was a student and stuff and maybe didn't read as much. I can't remember, but this was amazing, atmospheric. You follow a man and a boy, as it says in the blurb, who revisit Salem's Lot to almost face the evil that exists there. I think going in not knowing much more than that, other than it involves vampires, paranormal, kind of fantasy, but oh, so good. I've never watched any of the adaptations of this book, and I don't know whether to, if I'm honest. Then another favourite, which is slightly different. It's not got vampires, it's Pet Sematary. That still gives me the absolute ick. They're trigger warnings for like grief and loss. They've got this family who moved to their new little idyllic home. There's a busy road that goes past, and across that busy road is the Pet Sematary, where there's something way darker than you would ever expect. And I would say it is much more a story about the exploration of grief. But bear that in mind, because that could be a trigger for some people. Next up is The Troop by Nick Carr. This is most definitely one of the few horror books that I've read that literally made me feel nauseous and like vomiting at times. But I'm also like sometimes here for a horror that just like pushes on your emotions and literally has you going. So we've got this scoutmaster who once a year takes his troop of boys into the Canadian wilderness for a 3-day trip. So that's the setting. So you've got isolated kind of island setting. But in the tradition of camping, there's ghost stories told around the campfire, but they have an intruder in the campsite and they don't look very well. And the rest of the scout boys and the scout leader are exposed to it, and stuff happens. And people are infected, stuff. And there's a lot of body gore, but chef's kisses for being able to make me nauseous and literally at times go. So recommend if that's what you're looking for in horror. Next is The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. This was one of my top 3 books of 2023. Amazing story set in Jim Crow era, Florida. So that would mean the 50s. You follow a young black boy who gets into a skirmish with a white boy. The white boy's fault. But this young boy gets sent away to Reformatory, which is haunted by the ghosts of the young boys who have been there before and are now dead. So this is, it's a big book, but it did not feel like it at all. It explores a lot in respect to racism. The whole book's about that. Segregation, the horrors of such reformatories or schools for these young boys, which actually did exist. It's based on the author's great uncles or a family member's experience at a kind of similar school. I think that triggered the idea. I don't think what happens in the book is based on that, but it was horrifying, both from a kind of ghost story way, but also just for how these young boys are treated. And it just, as a horror book, it had my heart, and I want to read more by this author. Talking of ghost stories is a recent read that I've literally just read in February. Incidents Around the House by Josh Malerman. This is so spooky. If you like creepy house possession vibes, this is for you. It is told through the eyes of, she's either 7, 8, 9 or 10, I can't remember, Bella, who lives in her house with her mum and dad, but she is kind of haunted by this other entity that calls itself Other Mummy, who keeps trying to invite, tries to get, well, I want to be in your heart, or let me into your heart. Bella's always saying no, and the behaviours of this entity grow more sinister and bigger. And the narration is from the young girl, which makes it even more terrifying, I found. And you're also exposed to Bella's parents' relationship, which I'm not going to lie, is exposed as being on a bit of a shaky peg. This is everything you want in a creepy sort of possession, poltergeisty, haunted house horror. fantastic. I also recommend it in audio if you want to have a young girl narrate the whole terrifying story to you. Then another story kind of about a house. It's The Last House in Needless Street by Catriona Ward. This was my first book by this author. She is now an auto-buy author for me, but this one is still up there with all the other books of hers that I have read. It's a story about a serial killer, a stolen child, revenge, death, and an ordinary house at the end of an ordinary street. And what it says in the blurb is all of these things are true and yet they're all lies. This is a mine of a book. It easily, I spent the first half to 3/4 of the book having no idea what was going on. And if you've never read it, I say go with it. It was so cleverly done, and to be honest, in my review when I was checking my Goodreads earlier, I had said phenomenal. And the less you know going into this book, the better. Don't read reviews other than chef's kisses. This put Catriona Ward immediately onto my auto-buy author list. And now I'm going to give you another auto-buy author, 2 of their books. First one is Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, which is his most recent, by Grady Hendrix. This literally came out in January, I think. It's getting mixed reviews, but I loved it. The reason, so it's set in the 70s, can't remember now, but round about that time, and where young wayward girls are sent to this house where they go, like, they're pregnant, they're young girls, like under 16 and under, and their families send them there to deal with said situation. So, you know, such activities did and have existed. And this is where you find this group of girls who come together. There's a mobile library that comes along, and the owner of the mobile library gives them a book of the occult, witchcraft. And therefore, these girls, for the first time in forever, start to take the power into their own hands. I found it an amazing feminist story, and that Grady Hendrix writes female characters so good. Clearly done his research. I really enjoyed it. I was there for all of the vibes around this. Grady Hendrix does a good mix. There's probably less humour in this one than there is in some of his other books, but he does a good mix of horror, humour, and often, if not always, with societal commentary. So highly recommend that. One of his older books, I mean, I would recommend Horror Store, which is like about, effectively, it's not called IKEA, but a haunted IKEA. Highly recommend reading the physical and the audio at the same time, if that's within your gift, because the presentation of the physical book is great, but the audio is outstanding. Then we have My Best Friend's Exorcism, which gave me absolute, was it 80s or 90s vibes? Me growing up vibes, put it this way, and I loved it. It is basically about 2 friends, and one of them becomes possessed, and so her other friend looks to kind of help that out. There's so, like, also every one of these books have just got epic book covers. And then another one which I've mentioned in many sort of recommendation books before is the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. So note, vampire vibes, set in the 90s in Southern America, in the South, where these group of women have a book club, and they are stereotyped into the 90s expectation of a woman in the South, and there's a newcomer in the neighbourhood, and the book club can't decide if he's like Brad Pitt or Ted Bundy. Another kind of haunted house one is We Used to Live Here. I read this either in January or at the end of last year. It is so good. I think it's already been optioned for a Netflix series or movie, and I can absolutely like imagine it as that. So we have a young couple who move into a house, and a guy and his like family pop by one day during the I don't know if it's like bad weather, storm, whatever. They're going by and they're like, "Hi, I used to live here. Do you mind if I have a wee nosy?" So the answer to that question, if anyone ever asks you, is no, because then it happens. The family just kind of don't leave, and there is numerous things that happen between the guy who turns up and the woman who's, because her wife, or is it her partner, I can't remember, is out at work, and so she's dealing with this all herself because she's a bit of a people pleaser and she's let these people in, and then stuff happens in the house and with her, and with trying to understand who these people are, and her understanding, even with her neighbour, is like, who is this guy? It's creepy. Even like another reason to read it in a physical format is there's like two different kind of, I don't know how to explain, ways of the narrative. So there's, between the chapters, there's another bit of narrative that is quite similar between this kind of the chapter breaks, and there's a bit of Morse code at the end of these. So you have to get out the Morse code alphabet and then decipher this as you go through the book. Who isn't up for that? Anyway, I adored it. I thought it was outstanding, and I will read whatever this guy does next. And I cannot wait to see the adaptation. Then another that I just read last year, just came out, was Coup de Grace. This is a tiny novella, and I would say go in not reading any of the reviews, because some of the reviews kind of have spoilers about it. This was a book that I buddy read with some friends. You follow a guy who is in a mental state of his life where he kind of wants out of his life, and he decides that he's going to go to the beach and do that. So obviously trigger warnings for that topic. But he goes onto the metro and gets stuck in this like weird abyss of non-stop stations and hallways and stairways, and he's kind of being trapped there physically and mentally, and he experiences other characters in the story who he's like, what the hell is happening, where am I? So it's a bit of a mind bender, but there's elements in this book that I'm not going to say anything about, other than, is it maybe 3/4 in this book, I was like, WTF, you cannot be doing this, like, no, stop, I can. So many strong thoughts about this book. I loved it. I don't know what kind of genre it would be, and it feels more like psychological horror. It's queer, and yeah, that's all I would say. Please don't look at anything else and go in pretty blind. The next is a short story collection. Now, actually, I'm not a massive fan, like not a massive fan. It's not a go-to format short stories that I go to. However, this one was on Kindle Unlimited. It might still be, and I'm sure I'd seen somewhere online someone recommending this in passing, and I'd added it to my Kindle ages ago, and then I finally picked it up towards the end of last year, and it's At Home with the Horrors by Sammy Scott. This is a mix of 14 different stories about the mundanity of life, and then it throws something that terrifies us all into the mix. It's a mix of paranormal, supernatural, the natural, which can be as terrifying, ghostly, chilling, as well as totally horrific, horrifying short stories. I was blown away by this and pretty much loved every single short story. And the reason for the title is like the one place where you feel like you should be safe, and these collections of short stories just push at your terrors. I adored it. And actually, it's one of the things I've just reminded myself I need to check out more by this author. Next one is Delicate Condition, which I buddy read, and is a great exploration of, it's kind of like, gave me Rosemary's Babies vibes, but it's not directly comparable. I mean, in some instances it's called The Push Meets The Silent Patient. Both are books that I didn't enjoy, so I wouldn't use that as a reference, but if you do like those books, fair dues. Main content warning for this is pregnancy and infertility. Any of those triggering topics for you, don't read this book. You've got a main character who's desperate to have a child. She's trying IVF, but she feels like someone or something is trying to stop that all from happening. She's feeling gaslit, all of these horrible things, and then she finally falls pregnant, and then she loses a child, but she's convinced she's still pregnant. That's all I'm telling you. It is the book that the latest American Horror Story is based on, but I watched the trailer because I thought, once I'd read it, I thought, oh, I'll watch it. I watched the trailer and it looks bad. Like, it doesn't look good in my opinion, so stick with the book. Then another haunted house, or a house that is filled with horror, is Just Like Home. And so this is where we follow Vera, who returns to her childhood home after the demands of her mother, who still lives there and wants her to come back. They're estranged, and then you start, and there's like, I think there's like some random artist in their guest house at the back of the house. They play a kind of key role in Vera kind of coming to terms with coming back home to her childhood home, where she lived with her father at the time, who was a serial killer. And so she has to go through a whole lot of that stuff in this story. It's a pretty bleak and disturbing, toxic family story that kind of really exposes the darkness of humanity. I adored it. Next is The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. This is definitely, well, it's not a haunted house, but it's like a haunted motel, or is it? We find this kind of rundown motel that captivates this young woman who, did she go to work there? I think so. But it was the place where her aunt was like 35 years ago, and her aunt disappeared. In present day, you have two different timelines that are connecting these characters, and I think in the past timeline, her aunt was the night clerk, and just as people came into this motel, something just wasn't right. And obviously, because you have dual timeline, you also have dual POVs, which I loved. Kind of got ghostly vibes, missing women, great pacing, great character development, and a level of suspense that I love in a horror thriller. Then we've got classic slasher genre. This in itself isn't a classic. It's a new, well, when came out in 2022. Clown in a Cornfield. You have slasher vibes, clowns. So the clown is the mascot of, is it like one of their sports teams? It's called Friendo. But we follow Quinn and her dad, who moved to this small town called Kettle Springs for a fresh start after I think Quinn's lost her mum. And so they moved to this small town, total small town vibes. There's already, you can feel the older people in the town versus the young people in the town, tradition versus new, and stuff starts to happen that involves Friendo the clown. And it's epic slasher. And if you enjoy this, you have two other books, because there's 3 so far in this universe, and I was here for it. Great atmosphere, fun characters, and just epic kills. Different once again is a tiny novella called The Crypt of the Moon Spider. Do not read this book if you're terrified of spiders. It's kind of historical horror because it's set in like 1920s, and we follow a main character who's kind of been put in this place, Barrowfield Home I think it is, for the treatment of melancholy by her husband, who clearly thinks she needs dealt with, where this weird doctor uses something called like spider silk on invasive treatments on the people that are in this home. So much of this I really enjoyed, and it packs a punch because it's tiny. So other than knowing that's the premise, it's only 111 pages, so don't go in knowing any more than that. It was wild. Now I'm going to give you 2 books from an author who's now an auto-buy, because I've got their new one on pre-order already. Their first book in the kind of mainstream horror genre that I picked up was Camp Damascus by Chuck Tingle. This is wild. It's a story about the demons that the queer community in America face. I mean, this could just be the news right now. We're in a God-fearing community where there is this Camp Damascus conversion therapy. Not only does it deal with really good societal topics, it does it through, it's quite satirical, but there is a lot of body horror. Well, from the outside, and it's pretty much on the nose when it comes to homophobic, anti-gay conversion treatments and therapies or theory. This horror is so clever, it kind of tackles extremism in a totally weirdly bingeable, nightmarish and yet heartfelt way. Then there's this next book that came after that, which is Bury Your Gaze, which more takes on the Hollywood or TV production world of homophobia and gay stereotypes. You have a main character who's making this series, and he's been told that with his gay characters he needs to do this with it because this is what we do with all gay characters in TV and film, and he's like, nah, I don't feel comfortable doing that, but he's almost up for like an Oscar or an award, and so he's like, I can't do this, and then there's like weird haunting stuff that starts to come from the characters in his series that start to follow him and some of his close-knit group of people that he works with, friends, who start to experience stuff. In true Chuck Tingle style, it's more than just a horror. It really pushes against societal stereotypes and expectations in the queer community. It's fun and it's terrifying, so I highly recommend. Also, their new one, Is It Lucky Day, comes out this year. I've got it on pre-order. I know nothing about it. Then we have 3 books by Stephen Graham Jones, which if you like book 1, you have book 2 and 3 because it's the Indian Lake trilogy. Book 1 is My Heart is a Chainsaw. So I'll just touch on book 1 and I'll not mention anything about the other 2 because it is part of a trilogy. So this is a horror book that don't think I've read anything quite like it. It's full of layers and depths. Stephen Graham Jones himself is Blackfeet Native American author, and so this shines through on a lot of his books that he writes, in particular in this main character Jade. I loved her. She's half Indian and she's in high school as a college, can't remember, but she decides to write Slasher 101 horror paper for extra credit in the final months of her senior year. Jade lives and breathes horror movies, so she gets horror, she loves horror. It's the love of her life. Generally, she feels like socially isolated, so she uses this writing of this paper to share a bit about herself. Then she starts to think that her own small town in Idaho is about to become its own slasher movie. This is a bit of a slow burn horror. It's atmospheric. I loved the main character and I adored it. What I would say though is if you're not a fave with slasher movies and the slasher movie genre, some of this, there's lots of references in this, so if you are, you'll love it. If not, I'm not sure how you would feel about it. After that, you've got Don't Fear the Reaper and then Angel of Indian Lake. So that's the Indian Lake trilogy. There's 3 for 1. Next is another feminist horror with lots of body gore. As you can tell in the title, it's The Eyes of the Best Part. I love this. This is uniquely unhinged and wonderful. So we follow an amazing Korean American protagonist who decides to become a revengeful serial killer to keep her family together. Her family is kind of falling apart. This is epic feminist psychological horror. It's a really clever portrayal of a young woman's like psychological unraveling into what she then becomes. So as you can maybe tell from the title, it does involve cannibalism, and our main character, G1, becomes obsessed with the eating of the eyeballs. So body horror, feminist revenge, psychological horror. This is an utter mine and I loved it. I actually have 2 versions of this book. I have the paperback and then a special edition version because it's delightful. Just don't read it if you're squeamish, and don't read it while you're eating something. So now I've got 2 books from another author I really like, who is Christina Henry. This one is Good Girls Don't Die, and it's one of her newest ones, I think. And we have 3 POVs in this, and it's a nice blend of not like full-on horror, but a kind of horror thriller combo that's taken from a feminist point of view. So we have 3 characters in 3 very different scenarios, so one told one after the other, and then somehow they all come together. So if I quickly read from the synopsis, because I can't remember all their names, you've got Celia, who's got a misplaced life, and then you have Ali, who is on a weekend trip in the woods and it all goes terribly wrong. Then you've got Maggie, who is in like a deadly competition. Think Squid Games, but it's not. Basically her daughter's life is at risk, and in these 3 stories there's only one way out. So there's a connection. I'd say in general, it's a must read for fans of like slasher books or those kind of anything like in the creepy woods and all of that. Honestly, loved it. And then her other one, which I read before this one, is Near the Bone. Great winter horror. We follow a main character, can't remember her name, her husband, who basically live in the middle of nowhere in the winter woods in a mountain. And he is not a nice man. She knows that she should never upset him because we don't like him when he's not a happy man. He's a very abusive, coercive, horrible husband, but he is not the only monster in her world, in the woods, in the mountains. Atmospheric, creepy, isolated, also championing the main character because she deserves better. This is still, I would say, if you were going to pick one, this one, Near the Bone, and then the other one, but it kind of depends. If you're a seasonal reader, get reading it while we're in the late winter. And then we have another Stephen King. It is Different Seasons, which is 4 novellas in one book. This is the book that has the novella that was then adapted into The Shawshank Redemption, and its full title, bear with, is Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption. If you've seen the movie, you'll probably know why. Then there's The Apt Pupil, The Body, which is what the movie Stand By Me with River Phoenix back in the day, what would that mean, the 80s, is based on, and The Breathing Method. I would say 3 out of the 4 absolutely gripped me. I didn't love The Body as much, but it felt, because it was less horror, it was more coming of age story. The Apt Pupil is utterly terrifying, disturbing. Shawshank is amazing. And The Breathing Method is a really dark, disturbing story of a woman giving birth no matter what. Like, this is an epic novella collection. Next is some gothic folk horror for you. It's What Kind of Mother by Clay McLeod Chapman, whose new book, Wake Up and Open Your Eyes, has not long came out. I've got it on my bookshelf, haven't read it yet, but that tells you why I wanted this book, because I really enjoyed this. It's folk horror, gothic, as I said, and you kind of follow a single mum who was forced to go out on her own as a teen. She's kind of forced back into her childhood town, but like her kids all grown up, and like she kind of gets scrapes by being a bit of a palm reader at the local farmers market, and that's where there she connects with an old high school flame, and she meets him after, I think, he's kind of reclusive now because his infant son has been missing for like 5 years. So that's the kind of premise. Given what she does at farmers markets, she reads his palm and gets nightmarish visions. I finished this book going, WTF, in my mind was all over the place. I give you trigger ones because it is about the physical and metaphorical loss of a child. There's a lot of body gore, but yet it's simultaneously unsettling and gripping. There's another Stephen King. It is The Green Mile. Yes. So is this horror? Well, I suppose it is, because there are some really horrific things in it, but it's probably more fantastical and quite an accessible horror. It takes part in like a death row penitentiary where we have some very bad men in the prison. And we have the big character, Kofi. I think that's how you pronounce the name. Now, I've read, who is he evil? Or is he far, far a different kind of human being? And then you have the guy that runs Penetrate. Right, when I think of this book, I only can ever think of the movie characters because I saw the movie before I read the book. Don't let that put you off. The book is outstanding. It actually leaves you feeling it's both horrific and wonder, and full of wonder. Because in true King style, there's many themes: racism, guilt, redemption, and all about the nature of good and evil. It's not only haunting and atmospheric, it is super emotional. Highly recommend. This one was my first book by Hailey Piper. It's Benny Rose, The Cannibal King. Yeah, it's a weird title, but I love this. It's pretty short at only 164 pages, so I'm not going to tell you too much. We're in a small town and we have Benny Rose, the Cannibal King, who is almost like folklore legend. Every local kid knows him. and tell stories of him, especially on Halloween. This is also a great Halloween read, but in short, bloomin' brilliant horror. It gave me 1980s slumber party, urban legend, small town, slasher vibes. And another one under 200 pages, which I think I also might have got on Kindle Unlimited, the last one I did too, is Where the Dead Go to Die. It is a bit festive, so maybe this is one you want to keep for later on in the year. It's a unique take on the undead at Christmas, which is not only a political story, but actually quite emotional. So in short, it's about the monsters in the world who used to be us, but now it's time to euthanize. Post-infection Chicago Christmas. It's a great mashup of like horror and suspense, and it grabbed me straight away. The characters are complex, relatable, and it really does a great job of exploring the depths of human nature. Old-time vibes, who doesn't love that in horror? It's immersive and intense. Love the writing style, and it is more than just a zombie book. This left me thinking about this quite a while after finishing. Here's a tiny little book. It's only 58 pages and it's by another pretty much auto-buy author for me in the horror genre. It's Joe Hill, aka Stephen King's son, and this one is The Pram. You can get it on Kindle, or I think it was an Audible exclusive, and all about a husband's obsessive desire to have a child. Kind of took a typical trope and just flipped it, and therefore made the father the central character. It has lots of creepiness, a great twist, and some have said give Wicker Man vibes. This one is more supernatural, ghost story, horror. It's also young adult, and I'm going to read you the kind of first bit of blurb that comes from the book. It says, I always thought that hauntings began with houses. They don't. Of course. It's people, isn't it? It starts with people. So we follow like a former child psychic called Daisy, and she hasn't thought about her past for a long time. She was only 6 at the time when she heard about or felt these wise creatures in the wall of her house that were whispering secrets. It's perfectly creepy. It's what I love about horror. Daisy and the other character that's in this story, Nina, are just great characters. They're wonderful to read, they're complex, and despite the chaos they were both going through together, I was gripped to discover what was happening to Nina and then consequently Daisy. If you can hear titty tots, these two. I did have peace and quiet to do this film until these two arrived back. I will try and remember to show you them at the end of this video so you can say hello. This book is quite good and it touches on themes of trauma, family relationships, but please do check the trigger warnings. Other than knowing what Daisy's background is and then we're 10 years on, go in without knowing any more. Some of the twists in this made my jaw drop. Another YA one of is Ace of Spades meets House of Hollow, as they say, and it involves ballet? I feed her to the beast and the beast is me. Think the movie Black Swan, but with more diverse characters and more blood. We've got Laura, who's a perfectionist, and she really wants to make it in this Parisian ballet school, but she keeps getting overlooked and she will literally do anything to make it, and to prove that Black Girl can take centre stage. But she enters into the catacombs of this institution and she makes a dark deal. Despite being horror, still eloquently explores the elite world of ballet for a young black main character. It packs horror, mystery, thriller, social commentary, as well as fantasy. It gets bloody and dark when you start to understand the sacrifices the main characters made. Almost like in a deal with the devil. Delightful. A short lunch break has just been had because there's a lot of recommendations here. If you're still here, thank you very much, and give me a thumbs up emoji if you've made it this far. But we've got still quite a few to go. I think I'm way over number 37 because some of them I've given you quite a few of. The next one, one of my favourite characters is in this book that was a first read. I don't know if it's a debut by this author, but it's the first time I've read this author, and it was Mayfly. Oh my. I'm going to read a quote from it because this kind of sums up a bit of what the book is about. Men have always... I've got the laptop here. This is about to bark, so bear with. Men have always been permitted in fiction and in life to simply be what they are, no matter how dark or terrifying that might be. But with a woman, we expect an answer, a reason. It gives you a bit of a vibe of Mayfly. It is a wild roller coaster of a horror, and it totally messed with my head. Maeve is one of my favourite characters by day. She works in the world's happiest place on earth. Imagine Disneyland. Is every child's favourite princess. By night, Maeve haunts dive bars with a drink in one hand and a book in the other, imitating her literary heroes. But when her best friend's brother moves to town, he awakens something dangerous within her. Imagine Maeve adopts this like new persona. It's like female American Psycho. Into this book relatively blind, and boom, straight away I was like, I am here for this vibe and for Maeve. I loved the writing style, the dark humour. I loved Maeve's obsession with Halloween and Halloween songs. There's literally a full playlist documented in this book that you could listen to whilst reading it. But yet, with all the darkness, Maeve's friendship with her bestie and her grandmother are just the most heartwarming relationships ever. But it also showcases Maeve's isolation, desperation, and slightly disturbing view of the world. This is extreme horror, so it's very dark, so lots of trigger warnings. There is also quite a lot of graphic, intimate scenes, which is not normally my bag, but I was okay with it because of the story and it being less romance and more gore. Honestly, adored this character. Next one I read, and I don't know if I've heard a lot of people talk about it before, it's Crossroads, and it's about how far will you go to bring back someone you love. Chris's son dies in a tragic car crash and she is overwhelmed by grief. But one day a cut in her finger changes everything. Obviously this is very high on the grief horror. I would say it is intense, it's thought-provoking, it's emotive, and I would say go in knowing no more than that and watch the fear, horror and heartbreak unfold. Then there's Just Like Mother. Another wild ride. I have another character here called Maeve, totally different Maeve, and she hasn't seen her cousin Andrea for a long time since she left the cult. So there's old cult vibes in this. She's since moved on, and for the past 2 decades the cult that they were both raised in is a distant memory, and then Andrea reappears and she finally feels that she's found her best friend again. And Maeve is still like living the single life, much to the raised eyebrows of her cousin's rich friends. And then this is where you discover her cousin Andrea is involved in some big wellness fertility program where she's earned a lot of money. So that's the premise. So heads up, I mean, might be a thing in the title, but mother, childhood, fertility are all themes in this story. It's actually like a horror that explores the complexities of mother-daughter bonds and the conflicts within unconventional love. But in this story, Maeve and Andrea's relationship is utterly intriguing and mysterious. Like, it kept me gripped. Not only does this story dig deep into motherhood, but it also delves into the themes of identity, belonging, nature versus nurture, and the perceptions of truth and reality. Totally compelling read with pretty dark twists. The next one is Sister Maiden Monster. Now, I'm not even sure, this is not only wild, but one of the weirdest horrors I've ever read. And I kinda don't know how to fully articulate it, so I'm just gonna touch on it a little bit. So the premise is we're in a world where to survive you must evolve. There's been a virus, a global virus, that has teared through the world and has changed victims in nightmarish ways. And with all that going on, there's a small group of women that come together. So let me read this bit because I might get this actually wrong because it's so weird and wild. So of these group of women, you have Erin, who, once quiet and closeted, acquires an appetite for a woman and her brain, right? Then we have Savannah, a professional BDSM switch, discovers a new turn on, committing brutal murders for her eldritch masters. And then we have Mariva, plagued with chronic tumours, is too terrified to acknowledge her divine role in the coming apocalypse. As her growths multiply, so does her desperation. That sums up how weird this book is. There's some scenes in this book that will never leave me, ever. It's good dystopian horror, but it's pretty graphic. Bear that in mind. Does not hold back on graphic gore or sex. The latter, I have to say, if you are not familiar with my tastes, I really struggled with at times, but the other parts kind of edged this for me. And the gore was so utterly gross at times. I was just slightly in awe of the author's ability to bore me out and make me feel super nauseous. The story in general just felt so unique in both concept and the way it was told. So this one is really hard to put into words, but what I would say is if these topics don't gore you out, definitely check it out. Next one is my first ever Anya Alburn, and it's still my fave. It's Brother. It's set in Appalachia, in a crooked farmhouse miles from the road. Imagine Texas Chainsaw Massacre vibes. We have this family, pretty much keep to themselves, but often girls will go missing on this highway and the police never come knocking at their doors, which they're kind of happy about. But there's a teenager in this family who is desperate to break free from this unconventional, disturbing family. This book is so cleverly written. If you dig into Texas Chainsaw Massacre vibes, you kind of get what it's about, and obviously there's girls going missing. What I would say is, though, the gore in it isn't for gore's sake. There's such a good story underlying all this. The characters are so well written. Main character Michael is so utterly disturbing, but at the same time, Anya Alburn manages to make you feel empathy for him because he's so lost. His brother Rebel, however, is a whole other story. In short, this author does not shy away from deeply dark, disturbing storytelling, and I adored it. Next is a wonderfully unique feminist sort of vampire story, not your stereotypical one. It's women eating. We follow Lydia, who has an absolute desire for all the Japanese food, traditional food that her father would have eaten, but she's in London. Is she in the art scene, or she's kind of hanging around that area? But Lydia can't eat any of this. The only thing she can digest is fresh blood, and sourcing fresh blood is pretty difficult because, you know, she has certain desires of a certain type of being. It's probably one of the most unusual vampire stories, and it really isn't a vampire story, so if you go in expecting a lot of vampiriness, you will be disappointed. It's so unexpected, it's strange, but it's delightful. Yeah, Lydia and her mum are vampires, but again, it doesn't take you down that stereotypical vampire trope storytelling, and kind of that's what I loved about it. Not to knock traditional vampire stories, to be fair. It's a really clever way of putting the spotlight on the struggles of women through the lens of food and eating, and showcasing societal expectations, personal growth and identity. Lydia is a wonderful and super intriguing character. I really liked her. I just felt for her because she just wanted to be more human and have more reciprocated love. So if this gives you the overall vibe of the story, go in knowing that it's quite a unique sort of literary horror set in the modern day. If you can hear noises outside, the neighbours have just turned up with their kids, bless them. But if you can hear like kiddie noises, it ain't my furry ones. Right, if you're a fan of dystopian fiction, love horror, well obviously you must do if you're this far into the video, you need to check out Battle Royale. It is a mashup between Lord of the Flies and Squid Games. Came out, when? Let me check. 1999, it's an oldie. I watched the film first and adored it. It's Japanese horror. And it is so good. There's a class of high schoolers that are taken to a deserted island, part of a ruthless authoritarian program. They're kind of provided with arms and left there to kill one another until only one of them is left. This is intense. Constant threat of death and the game playing that goes on between each of the characters just keeps you on edge the whole time. Whilst at the same time, this story makes quite a lot of social commentary on authoritarianism, loss of innocence, government control, survival, unchecked power, and also dark aspects of human nature. It also explores friendship and sacrifice amidst like a really brutal horror dystopian nightmare. One thing I would say, this is a chunk of a book, but I think what's really reflective in that is just how complex and well developed each of the characters are, and they have their own backstories. This is an amazing classic horror. Next is another one that delves into the world of mother and child, parent and sibling. It is Mother Thing. And when I was looking back at my Goodreads Storygraph review for this, the first line of my review said, "What the actual did I just read?" So this is a darkly funny domestic horror, which is about a woman who has to take drastic measures to save herself and her husband from the vengeful ghost of her mother-in-law. First few chapters of this book, I had no idea what was going on and where it was going to go, which, to be fair, I did kind of like. It wasn't that it rubbed me up the wrong way. This is not standard horror. It's subtle in its disturbingness, whilst also there's gore that is combined with dark humour. It's a horror that explores the relationship of mothers and daughters, or mothers and children, and mother issues, and what mothers you if not your mother. This is an absolute blurring between reality and fantasy. And at this point, I'm still not really sure what was ever reality or not. This is one of those books that is quite good to either read with someone or discuss with someone who's read it after you've read it. It's toxic, quirky, dark, and gruesome. The first Josh Malerman I've mentioned, and I do love a Josh Malerman, I've still got more to read, but this one is my OG, still a favourite, and it's Bird Box. Obviously there's been this virus or something that's affected the world where there's these things now that you can't see, you can't ever look at them, you can't ever see them, because anyone does turns murderously insane. And so we're kind of now in this world where everybody has to avoid seeing these things and navigating that world. And we follow Mallory and her kids as they go through that world. This is classic dystopian psychological horror, and during this story you've got two timelines. You've got Mallory's present and the past being kind of how we kind of got here. I think some of the most terrifying parts of this horror is that whole thing that you cannot see, the whole thing that creates fear. Despite having seen the movie before actually reading the book, which I loved the movie, the book was still top tier for me. I adored it. Still one of my favourite Josh Malermans. It's horrifying, it's terrifying, it's full of suspense, and if you have watched the film, not read the book has so much more depth into it, as is often the case. It's a wild ride, and I literally consumed this in 48 hours, and I'm not a fast reader. Next is a classic called I Am Legend. Some of you may know. There's a movie, which is I love. I read this book again after I'd seen the movie. The book is only like 165 pages or something, so it's a novella, I would say, and wow, this is pretty much a lot of what you see in the movie, but so many parts are still quite different, including the end. So if you've seen the movie, this is not a spoiler. It's a good page turner and perfect little horror classic, a bit like my next one, which is Psycho. Yes, I've watched the movie numerous times. I've now read the book numerous times. Now, check out, it's only 208 pages. And I would say, like, I adore both. The book feels creepier, and there is way more to Norman Bates and his mother's relationship in the book than in the movie, so please do check it out. From classics to a fun teenage slasher, Chef's Kisses to Taste Like Candy. It's had lots of horror slasher elements to it. all of a slasher that made it so super enjoyable. You had a Halloween fairground setting, a group of high schoolers who are their like end of their school year on some sort of scavenger hunt in said fairground. Epic creative kills and brilliant tongue-in-cheek humour. This is probably aided by the fact that many of the characters were pretty high during the crux of the plot. This was fast paced, it was brilliant, it was funny, lots of gripping kill scenes, and an ending that just topped it off. Plus, I shall never look at watermelons in the same way. If you know, you know. One of my absolute favourites, and I couldn't miss it off this list. I've read that off this list. I can't even remember how many times I've read this. I'm not a big rereader, but I've at least read this about 5 times or something. It is World War Z. Now, this is not a book about zombies. Well, it is, but they're kind of like a side character. This is more about how different people, both those in power and those who are not, deal with the fallout of a deadly virus. It's like it predicted stuff. And that brings people back from the dead and ultimately war. As I said, zombies are kind of a side note. It's about the horrors of how different parts of the globe and people and powers deal with said. I mean, to read that now, if you've never read it before, will be kind of mind-blowing given it was written years... Actually, when was it written? 2006. I first read it in 2013, so way before the thing that happened in 2020. I have since read it since then. Scarily echoes reality, which is even more horrifying, honestly. Please. And actually, the movie's amazing, but the movie is quite different because the way that it's set out in the book is almost like transcripts and interviews and stuff, so much better than the movie, although I do love the movie. It's been about a second since I spoke to you about a slasher book, so here's another one. It's Camp Slaughter. The clue is in the title. This is the ultimate slasher read. If you're a big fan of slashers like Texas Chainsaw Massacres, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, this is for you. It had all the intense fear and gore that I love in classic horror, like gore horror. And I have to say, as with some of these books that I've mentioned, it's just good to see diverse authors in this genre. And if you love this, there's also Halloween Slaughter, and then I think the other one's The Final Slaughter. I haven't read them yet, and the only reason is every time I go to read Halloween Slaughter, I forget it's set in Halloween, so I want to keep it for Halloween, so this Halloween I have to read it. Most of these I think you can get in Kindle Unlimited. They did back when I read it, so don't come for me if that's no longer the case. And we're on the final stretch. We have 2 more for you. Say we, just me and the pups who are sleeping. Wait till you see this. We've got Snoozy McSnoozeville over here, and then this one, Living Our Dream, over there. They've clearly got bored of my chitter chat. I hope you haven't. If you're still here, thanks. One of these is feminist body gore, body horror, and the other one is a bit of a cozy horror just to finish everything off. The first one is Deliver Me by Elle Nash, which I read last year. If not last year, it was the year before. And I thought this was amazing. I've also met the author at 2 book events and she's super nice. This book is a brutal, wild, female-centred literary horror with amazing LGBTQ+ rep and Saltburn vibes. So we have the main character Dee Dee, who works at a horrible Missouri meatpacking factory, and as you can imagine, it comes with that job. It's just not a nice job. She deals with the brutality of that job, but also her innate longing to become a mother. She's suffered many miscarriages, so obviously content warnings for this story. But she finally becomes pregnant again, and she is beyond desperate for this to work out. But past choices in her life, leaving a very devout religious background, her really complicated, unstable boyfriend just add to all the complexities of her journey. And at the same time, you're just willing this to work for her, but you just see so many challenges. I felt for Dee Dee as a main character, she was so well written. I felt despair, disgust, as well as empathy for this character, because she's kind of like with societal expectations on her, but she's the kind of product of her upbringing and her world. It's a brutal book. There is a lot of body horror. I had a roller coaster of emotions with this one, because you're so champion Dee Dee to become a mother, but you're also aware of the world that she's in, this world of brutality and violence and instability and this constant feeling of worthlessness. This book covers so much, like the desire for motherhood and the societal pressures and the importance that society, the world, puts on women to become mothers. Miscarriage, mental health, class, so much in this. It is so dark but so cleverly written, and the story hung with me for a long time after reading. If you love horror and don't mind gore, definitely check it out. Then last but not least, I'm going to finish this up with not any slasher or gore or psychological folk horror. This is slightly cozy horror. It is Cackle by Rachel Harrison. So this is technically labelled horror. Many might argue that it's not, but it's got witches, it's got mischief, and it does have horror elements, but in a very accessible, cozy way. I would call it cozy horror. Very light horror. It's more about witches and the paranormal. It gave me spooky, sinister, small town witchy vibes, but it's also very feminist and cozy. And we follow Annie, who's just out of a long-term relationship, and she's kind of like still hankering after that, even though you as the reader, like, he does not deserve you, Annie. But she's utterly heartbroken. She uproots and moves to a small town with a new job to start a new life. And she soon becomes friends with someone called Sophie. Sophie has magical powers, and she is often feared by others in the town. And Sophie just really wants Annie to stop pining for this ex, right? So do we all as we read it. She's like, get rid of him, but she can't help. She's hankering after him. She's heartbroken, but Sophie just wants Annie to move on. And this is where, as Sophie tries to help her, and it's, you know, Annie's maybe going one step forward, two steps back, Sophie starts, you know, some of the magic starts to get sinister, and we kind of follow this friendship between Annie and Sophie, and things happen. And I'll not say any more, other than one of my other favourite characters in this book is a little guy called Ralph. And you need to read it to find out. He's adorable. This book is spooky, menacing, and 1000% delightful. So if you don't think horror's for you, then you probably haven't got this far. But if you have, and you still want to dip your toe in, try a little bit of light horror with Cackle by Rachel Harrison. I'm going to be reading more Rachel Harrison this year, but I have heard that she's much more lighter in horror, even though she's a horror writer. So I think she sits in the world of cozy horror, in my opinion, says me, having only read one of her books, maybe? I don't think I've read two. Maybe I have read two. I can't remember, because I've just talked to you about more than 50 books. Hopefully there's something in there, because as you can tell, the horror genre, like many genre, has so many subgenres, from gothic, historical, holy, slasher, gore, psychological, domestic, cozy. There's so much. And so I defy you to go in if you want to feel a little bit of the fear, which I love. I do think horror just has a special place in my heart, and I think it's such an underrated genre that hopefully you can find one book in here that you could enjoy. If you have watched this far into the bitter end, thank you, thank you, thank you. Please do give me a screaming face emoji. And if you did enjoy this, please do like and comment below. Let me know your thoughts. Let's carry on the conversation. And also, if you like this and would like to see more, please do subscribe. I would love you to. I really appreciate every single one of you all. Whether you watch and say nothing, whether you watch, like, and or both comment. So thank you as always, and I will see you in another bookish video very soon. Bye!